Muriel Consulting is more than recruiting. We provide personalized, unbiased support for advisors transforming their careers. Whether it's breaking free to go independent, launching your own RIA, finding a new broker-dealer that fits your vision, or securing capital for growth, we are here for your success. Learn more at murielconsulting.com. MURIEL consulting.com.
Welcome to the Kick It Open podcast, where we celebrate bold moves and reveal the strategies shaping success in the wealth management industry. Our goal is to inspire you to kick the doors open on your personal success. I'm your host, Shelby Nickel. Today, we're diving into what comes after success with a woman who's been redefining the way advisors and business owners think about life's transitions. I am so thrilled to be joined by Susan Latremoy, a former top wealth advisor with more than 35 years of experience at Merrill Lynch, RBC Dominion Securities, and at an independent wealth management firm. Susan is also the co-founder of Next Chapter Lifestyle Advisors, where she helps successful business owners and professionals navigate the non-financial shifts of life post-career. Susan, thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Shelby. It's a great pleasure to be here with you.
I am so excited to talk with you today. I think this idea of life after work is so important, and it's one that we see people, both advisors as well as certainly their clients, really struggle with. Let's talk first, though, about your career in wealth management. What was the gap maybe that you saw that led you to co-found Next Chapter Lifestyle Advisors?
As you mentioned earlier, for over 35 years, I was a wealth advisor and worked with my clients, preparing them for retirement and estate planning and beyond and so on. And, these relationships spanned over several decades. So I watched them as they transitioned through mid-career, end of career, and into retirement or selling their practice or their business. And what I noticed was that many of them were not as happy as they thought they would be. They were all high net worth, so they had the money to retire comfortably. But after they made the shift, they just weren't as happy. And I just felt, something's missing here. If I pride myself on being a holistic wealth advisor, why am I not paying attention to the whole picture and not just the money? So that was really the aha moment for me, the wake-up call to say, I need to do something about this problem. And that really was the impetus behind me selling my practice to work on this side of the non-financial side of this major life transition.
It's so interesting because I see a lot of wealth advisors who are being more holistic. They're adding tax, they're adding estate planning, et cetera. You see some of them that are going into almost like a financial therapy type of an approach and sort of life coaching. You've kind of done that, but also really this focus on what happens after work, right? After you, quote, as they say, retire, or others people will say not retire, but we rewire, et cetera. Was there maybe like a particular moment or a client story or something that sparked this decision to pivot?
Yeah, there was more than one situation, but the one that comes to mind immediately is my client, Alan. He was a business owner. His family had started in the previous generation a very successful family business in the furniture industry. And he was at that point where he felt he was ready to exit. He wanted to spend his days, the rest of his life in Florida, in his gated community with a golf cart parked in the driveway, a swimming pool in the backyard, his membership at the golf club. He was already a keen golfer, but his dream was to retire there and golf. And so he was so excited when I had this meeting with him in November. And he was leaving shortly thereafter. And I didn't see him or really hear from him throughout the winter. But when he came back in May, of course, we had another get-together, another meeting. And I was really looking forward to seeing a man who I thought would be tanned and happy and just thrilled with life. And actually the opposite. He was down, depressed. He said, I'm so bored with the same guys that I golf with every day. They're all retired. He said, I'm just fed up with playing golf. He said, I thought I'd be better by now. And as many golfers know, it doesn't always work that way. So he was frustrated with his game of golf. And from playing so much, he'd injured his shoulder. And so that had set him back. So he had gone from all of this optimism and anticipation into a place of a very negative place, quite down. And I thought, gee, there's something wrong with this picture, bored, frustrated, depressed. And he wasn't alone. I started to see this pattern recurring many times, especially with the most successful people. And so that was what really led me to say, again, this is not right. Something needs to change, and I'm going to be the one to change it.
You know, it reminds me so much of some of the advisors even in our industry, right? We see that there are advisors that are in their 60s and even into their 70s, for sure into their 70s, maybe even into their 80s, who have not really set up a really great succession. And so as a result, they're really kind of hanging on to that business. I think they haven't thought about what their next chapter really looks like. That's really what led me to explore the certified exit planning analyst or advisor rather program. The CEPA program really led me to you because you're one of the instructors for the Exit Planning Institute's program. What drew you to the CEPA, and what advice do you have for advisors maybe who are running their own businesses and need to be thinking about that next chapter for themselves?
Well, really what drew me to the CEPA program, to the Exit Planning Institute, was the whole methodology that they espouse, the value acceleration methodology, which, as you know, Shelby, as a fellow CEPA, has a concept of the three legs of the stool. So the three legs of the stool for a business owner are, of course, business planning, personal financial planning, and then personal planning. And that leg was terribly neglected. Most advisors focus on either the business growth or personal financial planning, but nobody talks about the life of the business owner, especially post-exit. So that's what really drew me to the whole Exit Planning Institute. And then because there's so few people working in the non-financial side, they asked us if we would, Marianne and myself, are the partners of Next Chapter Lifestyle Advisors. They asked us to join the faculty to teach personal planning to other professionals that are becoming CEPAs. So really, I think for many advisors themselves, they are in effect like business owners, even though they may think of themselves as, I'm a financial advisor, or I'm an insurance specialist, or I'm a lawyer, or an accountant, or whatever. It really have to start this thinking of, I am in fact a business owner myself. And therefore, I have the same issues and same questions and same problems to some extent as any other type of business owner. So when it comes to advisors themselves planning for their next chapter, in a way, it's harder than the average business owner because for any fee-based advisor, these fees are like an annuity business, let's face it. And once you get your practice set up and you have loyal clients and a good team, it kind of goes on autopilot unless you're being intentional to bring in new services. So there isn't that push necessarily for an advisor to exit that we would see perhaps with some business owners, either because of the other shareholders or partners in the firm or just absolute fatigue from working so hard for so many years. So I think we have to think of advisors as business owners facing the same challenges and the same type of planning needs that business owners have.
We'll be right back.
Muriel Consulting is more than recruiting. We provide personalized, unbiased support for advisors transforming their careers. Whether it's breaking free to go independent, launching your own RIA, finding a new broker-dealer that fits your vision, or securing capital for growth, we are here for your success. Learn more at murielconsulting.com. MURIEL consulting.com.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I think these advisors often are struggling, right? They haven't done true kind of exit planning as we've been taught to, maybe through the CEPA program, right? I think there's, I was reading the other day, I think there's 7,000 CEPAs in the country. And about 2/3 of those are financial advisors. But that's a far cry from the number of financial advisors who are out in the marketplace, right? So there's many, many fewer CEPAs. And so I think some of those those techniques just haven't made it all the way into the advisor mindset. And even if they have, they still, it's almost like shoemaker. What is the phrase about the
Shoemaker's children has shown no shoes.
Yeah.
It's so true. That's so true. And I was actually on the board of directors of the independent firm that I worked with for the last 15 years of my career. And I was privy to some of the problem situations that my fellow advisors had created for themselves by not being really able to retire financially because they had not looked after their own affairs to the same degree of attention that they had for their clients. And I thought, how sad is that? You've got the knowledge, then why aren't you taking care of yourself?
I think one of the things that comes in, and I know we're going to bounce around a little bit here. I want to talk about kind of consumers and just, everyone. And then I also want to talk about advisors. So let's go to the advisors a little bit more since we're on that topic. One of the things I see, and I did a podcast on this with Leanne Miko a few weeks ago, we chatted about a failed succession opportunity in her case where she went into an advisor practice and then the advisor decided to go a different direction, essentially kind of not retire. And, they didn't have the transition that she was planning for. And we see that a lot, that there's, advisors in their 70s, maybe even into their 80s, kind of holding on tightly to their work, and their kind of junior successor, meanwhile, as a person in their 40s or 50s. How do we support that 40-year-old, the 50-year-old in helping to maybe guide that elder partner, that elder statesman of the practice into a healthy retirement? What advice would you have for that person?
Yeah, first of all, I just want to say it's very common that senior advisors bring on juniors or their transitional team with the promise that one day they're going to leave and then they don't. And I've seen many of these hopeful successor advisors get disillusioned and actually go a different direction because the senior just won't budge. So, and it's hard for the firms too because they like the revenue, of course, that practice produces, and they might be scared that if that senior leaves, that some of the assets will go as well. But I think it really has to be, you have to put a line in the sand and actually set a date that senior advisor is going to step away. If it's open-ended, it can just go on and for years and never really come to the finish line. So I think to any junior advisor, not even junior, but mid-career advisor that's going to be taking over, that you really have to sit down and say, we have to put an end date on this, or I'm not willing to succeed you because, it's too risky for me if you change your mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's really important. And it is risky for them. And then what's happening is they're leaving that practice. They're going a different direction, as you said, and they feel like they're starting from scratch at that point, right? They feel like they're starting from a zero and trying to build a practice because they want to be an entrepreneurial advisor. And they thought they had a pathway towards that was going to work for their family and give the exit an appropriate exit and give those clients an appropriate, I think, transition, right?
I also think it's really sad for the senior advisor to be sitting there, maybe not as engaged, maybe behind in terms of their technology savvy for updating the systems and processes within their practice, and just kind of vegetating. I've seen it and too many times where they're just like bored, fat and happy is what I usually call it, but not so happy. But the sad part is that they're missing a whole part of life that awaits them after they make their move. And, if you get into your 80s or even beyond and health starts to go, the last thing anybody says on their deathbed is, I wish I'd spent more time in the office. And that can so easily happen as the years slip by and you haven't made a new life for yourself after you exit.
Well, let's talk about that because that's such a human need to have a new life for yourself after the exit. How do we help people, whether it's ourselves, the advisor, or it's the client? How do we help people do that? Like, what are they maybe running from, or, what is the emotional or the identity kind of challenge that they're facing, and how do we help them?
Yeah, so the identity challenge is a big one. And actually, it's more than just identity. And I've kind of coined this acronym called S.I.P.S, S-I-P-S. So the first S stands for social connection. And that's one of the challenges that people face when they exit is they're no longer as connected to their team, to their customers or clients, to the suppliers. They just kind of isolated from that. So that is one loss that people experience, is that social connection. I, of course, in S.I.P stands for identity, which you put your finger on, and that's a huge issue when people say, I used to be a director of this or president of that, and now I'm a nobody or I'm retired. So we often say you go from a who's who to a who's she, or a who's who to a who's he overnight. And that's uncomfortable for many people. The P in S.I.P stands for purpose. And when we're working, we all know what we're getting up in the morning to do. We have deadlines, we have targets, we have revenues to produce, etc. But after you exit, unless you redefine purpose and decide what your new purpose would be, people say, it's no fun getting up in the morning. I have nothing to do, nothing that's purposeful in my life. And then the final S of S.I.P is structure. And, people rail against the 9 to 5, but actually we need structure in our lives. We need to have a delineation between work days and not so much work days, free days or vacation time. But when people retire and they don't have a plan, every day feels like it's just an endless string of days without any delineation. And then the morning, afternoon, and evening are really 3 time slots in everyone's life. And when you add all those up together, that's 21 time slots, 7 days a week, 21 time slots that you have to think about filling. So having structure really helps to make the best use of your time. So those are the basic challenges that we see with people. And then when you add on the fact that you're a business owner, the additional challenges that you face usually look like the loss of status or the power that you had in running the company, the recognition that you've received by your industry and by the community. So there are additional challenges that business owners and high performers face beyond what the average person would have in their worry list. Mm-hmm. So what we do about it, so really we take a 2-pronged approach that next chapter, Lifestyle Advisors. First, we work with financial advisors and we give them tools and resources and training and so on to help them talk to their clients and work with their clients in a different way that goes beyond just the financial side of things. Then on the client side, and many advisors do send their clients to us because, after all, they're not in the business of helping them do these detailed non-financial plans. So they send them to us, and we actually have a 5-step process that we take people through. And this could apply actually to advisors themselves. Some of our clients are financial advisors, in fact, and have gone through our process to build what we call at the end of the exercise their happiness portfolio for retirement, or rewirement, as in many cases it turns out to be. And so the happiness portfolio is really the brainchild of my business partner, Marianne. She actually wrote a book, Your Happiness Portfolio for Retirement. It's not about the money. And not that the money isn't important, but the book focuses on really how to build that happiness portfolio. And just like all portfolios in the financial world, we feel that diversification and balance are 2 main ingredients. And therefore, building a life that has some diversification to it, it's not all work or not all play, and is balanced is a really important aspect to it. So that's how we help both advisors, financial advisors, and clients. And it could be individuals or couples. We always believe that if someone has a spouse or partner, that they should be involved in the planning as well.
Yeah, there's so much richness in what you've just described. I will say one of the ahas I just had was this idea of structure. I hadn't really thought about that, and how even as tiny children, right? We would say that babies and toddlers, they need structure in their life because it helps them feel comfort, right? And it helps them have less anxiety and then less acting out, right? I didn't think about that same approach until you said that, really carrying forward all the way to our later years as people, as humans. That was such a huge aha for me right there.
Are you a financial advisor ready for a big leap? Making the decision to leave your firm, whether it's a broker-dealer or an RIA, can feel like stepping into the unknown. Muriel Consulting provides personalized, unbiased support to help you navigate transformational career moves with confidence and confidentiality. Schedule a discovery call at murielconsulting.com. MURIEL consulting.com.
You know, one of the things you also mentioned was that your partner, Marianne, has written a book. And I know you've written a book too, 9 Steps to Rich Life Retirement, Live Well, Give Back, and Leave a Legacy. I love this idea of the rich life retirement. And you've talked a little bit about that already, but tell us more about your book and what you hope people take away from it.
Mm-hmm. Well, actually, the first book I wrote was called The Rich Life, Managing Wealth and Purpose. And the reason I wrote the first book was that I saw many of my clients with lots of wealth, but no connection between their wealth and what they were going to do with the wealth. And I thought, how sad is that? They're anxious to make more money in the markets, but when you actually look at it, they have more than they need. So what's that money for? So that was the impetus of this whole rich life thinking. And I started to look into the definition of what rich means. And we all think of it as money, 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 but really the true definition of rich means robust and full and complete and royal and so on. So having a rich life. And then I thought, well, then how do you define that? So that's where that kind of mantra for a rich life came in. Live well, whatever that means to you. It could be, having a second home or a third home. It could be all financial, or it could also be the importance of family, friends, community, and so on. But each person defines live well for themselves. Then when it comes to the give back part of the rich life, it's really about sharing what you have or what you know. So people sometimes think, well, it has to be all money or charitable, but really no. People can give back in many ways, mentoring, volunteering, or financial if you have the means to actually do that. And then leave a legacy is really what's left when you're gone. And, when you're young, you don't really think about your legacy. But I find that as people get older and they're reading the obituaries in the paper, they would say, he really left a legacy, and that highlights really all the important things that person did in their life. And a lot of it is, again, non-financial, has to do with the impact they had on others through their community. So that's how I sum up the rich life philosophy: live well, give back, leave a legacy.
I love this idea of rich life, and it really reminds me of the book. What is it? The Soul of Money, the Lynn Twist book.
Yes, The Soul of Money. Yes,
yeah. Because she talks there about
classic.
how the word wealth means really well-being, and I didn't think about that. It's the same thing with rich. That rich means robust and full, as you said. I hadn't thought about that, just even the definition of that.
Mm-hmm.
I love that book, The Soul of Money. I know it sounds like rich life is right there aligned with it. All of it comes back into this idea of something bigger than ourselves and purpose and having a legacy, kind of having a reason that we're here. It's really interesting how you've woven that in. It feels like sometimes that's just like this missing piece. It's like overlooked. As we take agency over our careers or over our lives, we're talking about our career and maybe how we want to run our house, but we don't say, I want to have agency over my purpose too. Is that kind of part of it?
Absolutely. And finding purpose is so important. We follow the work of Richard Leider, Leider, and he's kind of who we think of as the father of purpose. And he defines purpose in 2 ways. You can have big P purpose, which is like save the rainforests or, end pollution or things that are very grand and worldly. Or you can have P with purpose with a little p, with a small p. And that purpose could be as simple as, helping someone struggling cross the street, carrying groceries in for an elderly person, taking your neighbor's dog for a walk when they're not well. I mean, these are little things, but they're extremely important as well, and just as important in finding purpose in life. So purpose is a fundamental human need. If we don't have purpose, we start to kind of die from the inside. We call it inner kill. So again, it doesn't have to be a grand purpose, but it needs to be a reason to get up in the morning, or multiple reasons to get up in the morning for sure.
just yesterday, Susan, it was so funny. I had breakfast or coffee with a local contact in the wealth management industry, Sarah Hartsky. She's a wholesaler for Allspring, and we met up for a casual coffee. But she was sharing with me how she's bought this new home. It's from somebody who has lived there for a very, very long time and has been just part of this little neighborhood for a really long time. This lady was the casserole lady. And so there's a deep freeze in the garage where everybody in the neighborhood, in the parish in this case, will drop by these casseroles that then go to the St. Patrick's Center, which is they provide services to homeless and they have various housing options for people who need it. And they provide some of this food. And so I guess these different parishes have different casserole recipes all around the community here in the St. Louis area. But she's like the drop-off point for one of those parishes. And they all make the same casserole, but every month they have to drop off their casseroles and then she drives them to the St. Patrick's Center. But she has this freezer. Well, the person who owned the house before her was doing this. So she's just taking it over. She's like, oh, I'll do that. I'll take it over. That way people's drop-off stays the same. There's, these 80, 90-year-old families that have been doing this for 40 years and have been contributing these casseroles. But it was such the small p purpose. It was...
That's a perfect example, actually.
So
a really
heartwarming.
Lovely example. Yeah. Really great. Yeah.
I was like, oh, I want to be the casserole. Like, I need to figure out what do I have in my neighborhood that we could do something like that. Like, it's so beautiful. It feels so small town, feels so connected to people.
Exactly. Exactly.
It seems as if, and this is me being so gender stereotypical, right? But I hear these stories from women. I don't hear men finding those same outlets in that way that just sort of, maybe tugs at your heart and really drives that happiness, right? That centering. Do you have any advice for the men in our industry, and how can they kind of tap into that same feeling and help their clients tap into that?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it all starts with changing your mindset about being a man and realizing that there is potential to have conversations that aren't all centered around the markets and, interest rates and the economy and inflation and all that stuff. But, we're not trained as financial advisors to have any kind of different conversations. So I think it comes more naturally maybe for women and for female advisors. So that's one advantage they have. But we also have many male advisor clients that have realized that it's in their best interest and in their client's best interest to go beyond the money and to start changing the conversation to include what's the client's life look like. And actually, I maintain that you can't even do a proper financial plan for someone as an advisor until you know what their life looks like. When people retire, they take on all sorts of new activities, some of which cost a lot of money. We had one client, and he said, when I retire, I'm going to start collecting vintage cars. He'd always been a car buff. Well, what does that cost? Another client said, I'm taking my whole family, kids, grandkids, we're going on a major trip. Well, is that factored into the financial plan? Or for some, it's like, okay, I sold my business. I've got millions. I want to start a philanthropy plan. I'm going to start a foundation or participate in a donor advised fund. Well, has your advisor really done the numbers and helped you with that? So I think male or female advisors have a role to play in understanding what their clients need and want, and then integrating that very solidly into the financial plan, and then ultimately the investment plan and whatever insurance needs might come from that and so on.
Yeah, I think that probably some of our advisors, we can dig more into that heart just by framing up that conversation. Because I know many of them are having, like, what do you picture retirement to look like, et cetera, right? Like, that's a surface level.
Yeah, exactly. We call it the bucket list.
Yeah.
It's not a plan, it's a bucket list. And so when you ask, that's a terrible question for an advisor to say, so what's your retirement look like? Because the answer is going to be, I'm going to golf more, I'm going to travel, I'm going to redecorate my living room, babysit the grandkids. Hey, you're going to live another 25, 30 years. That's not a plan. Those are all great items, great things to do, but they're very small components of a bigger picture plan. So that's what we address in building the happiness portfolio. That's 8 areas of life that you need to look at and decide, what your plan is going to be. And then write it down. And then, part of our process, the fifth step of our process at Next Chapter is actually holding people accountable. So when they say, okay, I've neglected my health, now I need to hire a nutritionist, I'm going to join a gym, I've got to lose some weight. Okay, we check in with people. Have you actually done that? If you say you're going to put your name forward for a board seat in a charity or even a company, have you cleaned up your resume? Have you actually made those contacts that you need to make to get it done? So these are just small examples, but they're all part of that plan, that longer term plan that needs to be in place. So you know where you're going as the exiting business owner or retiree, and your advisor knows as well how to structure your affairs so that you can live with the best intentions with the funds and plan that you have in life.
Gosh, there's so much opportunity there for amazing and rich conversations with clients. It reminds me.
But the hard part is that many advisors don't know how to have those conversations. And that's what we teach in our advisor program. We actually have case studies and we actually familiarize advisors. And, I'm a perfect example. When I first got onto this idea, it took me a lot of years before I had the nerve to start to change it up. So I was very, scared of my first client meeting where I didn't sort of lead the usual way. And it was actually miraculous what happened. It was like a floodgate of conversation opened. And I was able to really tap into that client's fears, like what keeps them awake at 3 a.m, what they feel their opportunities are, what their strengths are. And then, that all led to a very rich conversation, very rich information that then I was able to take back and put together an overall strategy for them. And that's what was the differentiator for me in terms of client loyalty, in terms of converting prospects to clients. I didn't go into a prospect meeting with, tell me about your assets. It was way beyond that, much, much richer conversation, which then, they say after the end of a meeting like that, I can trust you. I'll move, I want you to be my advisor.
It's amazing. At the beginning of this, today we talked about your client, Alan, and how they felt how he felt in retirement. Can you talk about the other side where you've helped a client through this process and what that maybe more successful retirement can look like?
Yes. Actually, it was a true story of a financial advisor who was exiting from his practice. And he went through our process, and he was a pretty great numbers guy. I worked with him, and he was really sharp. And then the first step of our process is actually a deep dive into your behavioral DNA. So it looks at 85 characteristics that make up your behavior. And when we did this, what came out was his interest in entertainment, humor, performance, music, the whole thing. And I just said, Jim, there's something here. What is it? And he said, actually, I've always wanted to write comedy scripts, but I never really paid any attention because I just thought it was ridiculous. And sure enough, wired into him was this humor streak. So anyway, it allowed him to really find comedy as one of the activities in his Next Chapter plan. And he's been taking comedy courses and doing stand-up and improv and just loving the whole experience. So that's one case, financial advisor to comedian or performer. Another client was a helicopter pilot, actually, but he discovered through our process that he actually used to write a lot. And he had gotten away from writing because that's not really what you do when you're flying a helicopter. And he rediscovered writing, and he's since written 2 books, and now one of them's being turned into a screenplay. Again, I mean, who knows? Not everybody finds such a dramatic change of course, but there's a lot more potential that we have in our lives than just sticking with your work. And I should say for some people, staying engaged with their profession or what they used to know is very important. I'm thinking of another client who was CEO of a company, And he wanted to maintain, even though he sold his participation in this private company, he wanted me to remain involved. So he's now an executive director. So he's keeping his professional hand in. And I mean, that's basically what I've done, exiting as a financial advisor, but staying very much engaged with the industry and with other advisors and clients. So, it doesn't have to be a complete split off from what you did before.
Yeah, I love that. It really reminds me of my transition from corporate America into entrepreneurship, right? I had come up in marketing and client experience and product development, and I took kind of a right turn to leading a line of business inside of a broker-dealer. I was leading cash and lending solutions and margin and securities-based lending kind of products, right? Very kind of boring line of business, but I wanted to run a P&L, and I did, and it was great. But as I exited, I realized how far away I'd gotten from like the creative center of myself. And that just happens over these decades of experience that we all gather, right? And I'm like a perfectly like center thinker, right? Like on those brain tests, I always show up in the middle, like I'm analytical and creative. And so, I love the negotiating work that I get to do today and the matchmaking I get to do. And I also love the creative of helping people with their marketing. But coming back to that creative side for me was, it was like coming home. And it sounds like some of your clients have gotten that experience as they've exited too.
Yeah. And your story's a beautiful one because it does show that you have the two sides of your brain that really function well. And for a lot of people, they have to find the other side of their brain. If they've been all analytical all their lives, which so many business owners and advisors have to be to a certain extent, then for some, this is their opportunity to uncover the creative side, or their opportunity to uncover maybe more of a humanitarian side, lending those leadership skills to a not-for-profit, or doing something in the community in a leadership role, not necessarily just a business role.
As we kind of start to begin to close out our time together today, one of the things, Susan, that I have loved getting to know you a little bit through this process, meeting you through CEPA, having the opportunity to record with you today. You've been in this industry of ours for a really long time, and I know I felt like it was male dominated in my tenure inside of corporate America. I'm sure you did too, given the time period when you started, and you led for a while an all-woman team. How did that kind of come to be? And talk about a little bit about your time in the industry and maybe what you hope for the next generation of women advisors specifically.
Sure. Yeah, it takes me back to my days in the 80s when I first joined Merrill Lynch. I was actually on the institutional side of the business, and there were no women. I mean, it was fixed income, bonds, equities, research, corporate finance, really no women. And so I found then that you had to be better to be equal to the men.
Mm-hmm.
You had to do a better job, work a bit harder. I also got had some luck along the way that I landed in some good positions. But for women advisors today, I think there's tremendous opportunity. And I know a lot of women get turned off the whole idea of actually being a financial advisor because they think it's all just, a man's world and numbers and, very competitive and so on. And I think women are ideally suited to be financial advisors in this era, because now this human element is so important in advisory work, and it comes more naturally to many women than it does to men. So I would say to women, just dive in. You're going to be fine. But the one caution I would have is don't necessarily just focus on getting female clients. I know a lot of advisors think, well, you're a woman, so you must specialize in women clients. But I always thought myself that was like negating half of the population, like omitting them from your practice. So I think, you can have a focus on women and helping women, but don't ignore that men are excellent clients as well, and couples too. Yeah. So leading an all-woman team was kind of initially by accident, in that I was lead and my number 2 person was also a woman. And we did have some men come and go, but nobody really stayed as part of the team. So it just morphed into an all-woman team, which actually we started to get really great feedback on. We had women clients that had been through a divorce or had been widowed. And so there was a lot of emotion with them. And they weren't as afraid to let that emotion out. I always had a box of Kleenex in my credenza because I knew sometimes the tears would flow if the client had been through a difficult event. And so they appreciated that they weren't embarrassed then to let the tears flow in front of other women. I also had male clients say, "We love working with your all-woman team because you're so meticulous. You look at every detail, you cover all the bases, and you look after us really well." So there's advantages for sure. But at the end of the day, it's really about who's the best person for the job. So I had nothing against hiring and bringing men into the team, but it was really finding the best talent to support the clients and be part of the team.
I definitely see a lot of women advisors ending up with accidental or purposeful all-women teams. And, we hear a lot about adding women to teams. And I think there you just have to have the right dynamics. Like you said, it's just about creating the right team to serve your clients really well.
Exactly.
I appreciate you sharing that story. So, I'm going to transition a little bit here at the end or at the end of our time together, but we always end with some really quick hit short questions just to share some quick perspective, give a little bit more value to our listeners. What is your favorite app on your phone right now?
My favorite app on my phone, which I use every single morning, is Insight Timer. And it's an app that has meditations. So I open my app even before I get out of bed in the morning, open Insight Timer, and I scroll through and find usually a 10-minute meditation that I feel is right for me that day. And then I do the meditation. That's Insight Timer. I have lots of other apps, but that's the one when you ask that question that comes to mind right away. And it's a very big part of my morning routine.
I love that. Love that. What is one thing that you've always wanted to learn, but you haven't had the chance to yet?
Well, I'm kind of getting the chance to learn it, and that is scull rowing.
Oh.
So rowing in one of those long, skinny boats with, like you see in the Olympics. I took it up a few years ago, and I'm still very much a beginner, but I really love it. Being on the water, being part of a team, physical sport, it's really fun.
Oh, wow. I just have never heard that answer before, and I love that. What is a book that you find yourself recommending all the time?
This is a book that had tremendous impact on me when I first read it. It's written by Stephen Cope, who actually is a scholar in residence at a yoga center in Lenox, Massachusetts. And the book is called The Great Work of Your Life, A Guide for the Journey to Your True Calling.
Oh, that sounds wonderful. I will definitely go pick that up. What is something that brings you joy? And I know you have many things that brings you joy outside of work.
The first thing that comes to mind is my grandchildren.
Of course, yes.
Age 6, 3, and newborn. I just love them, and I just experience such joy when I see them, when I'm with them. It's amazing.
Oh, that's great. And what's one word that you'd use to describe kind of this chapter of your life that you're in right now?
Variety.
Ooh.
I get to do everything. Have my hand in professionally, do hobbies and sports that I enjoy. See more of my kids, my grandkids, travel. There's variety.
That's wonderful. Yeah, you've created that full, rich picture of that life. All right, we always close with our signature question. The podcast is called Kick It Open. And so what is one door that you're kicking open right now?
Well, I hope I'm kicking open the door for advisors to change the game. I hope that through the work that we do, that they're able to truly add value to their clients and the relationship, that they are truly different from the rest in this competitive marketplace, and that they then have such happy clients, such raving fans that the referrals just come in the door. So I'd love to kick that door open, Shelby.
Oh, I love that. I love kicking that door open, more value to investors and to humans and creating greater impact in the world. I love that. Susan, thank you so much for joining me today on this podcast.
Shelby, I've really enjoyed it. It's been great chatting with you.
Yes. And for all of our listeners, I hope this inspires you to think about the steps that you're taking every day to achieve your highest ambitions and setting up your life the way that you want it for the really long term. We are kicking doors open every single day. And thank you, listeners, for being part of the journey. Until next time. Thanks for listening to the Kick It Open podcast. The Kick It Open podcast is hosted and developed by Muriel Network. Kick It Open is produced by Shelby Nickel, edited by Aaron Sherman, graphic design by John Gallagher. If you found today's podcast valuable, please help us out by subscribing and sharing with your friends. Just click that little plus sign or the follow button wherever you get your podcasts.